Episode 87 of the Fired Coaches podcast. Today we are joined by Nick Pasqua, who is the head coach at Coker down in South Carolina Division II program on the men's basketball side. Nick's been a head coach at the Division II level for quite a while now. He's been a head coach at Tusculum, Southern Wesleyan, Converse. He played at King's College, where he was also an associate head coach, had a lot of success there. So really excited to kind of dive into Nick's background. So Nick, appreciate you joining the Fire Coaches podcast today.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be on it. I think what you do where you give a voice to guys who've been through a tough time and then get to their side of it is something great. Not a lot of people get to talk about, that part of the journey. They kind of skip over it pretty quick. So, excited to be on this and talk some.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you joining. As we were mentioning off air, I said my wife, played actually at Coker on the women's side for a little bit. So there's a lot of similarities. You're an 08 graduate of college. You're a sport management guy, which is what I was. The only real difference is you were a 4-year starter. You were really good. I was a 4-year bench player. So other than that, we're very similar. So I guess, talking about being at King and obviously having a great career playing for Coach Pitts, what was that like that made you want to kind of transition into the coaching side at such a young age?
Yeah, so I was very, very fortunate. I was an okay player. I'll say it this way. I would not recruit myself if I was in that position now, but was very fortunate to get to play in college. And then when Coach Pitts came, he came my junior year. He really kind of turned our program around there. He was the all-time winningest high school coach in the state of Tennessee. Won more state championships. I mean, he's in the Tennessee State Hall of Fame. He's in every Hall of Fame you can be in. So, he walked in the door with credentials that really showed us what we could be. I think I always knew I wanted to be involved in basketball. Obviously, as a kid, you think that's going to be playing for a long time, and then you get to college and realize that's not going to happen. And so I always wanted to be a high school coach. That was always my vision and plan. And then, things kind of went a different direction. We got beat my senior year in the national tournament, and our assistant coach was leaving. I didn't know that. And then he was taking a high school coaching job. And so Coach Pitts actually called me down to his hotel room. Never forget it. And, we just got beat in the national tournament. I was like, why am I getting called to the principal's office right now? Like, what could this be about? And so went into his office and I forgot about it, but at the start of the year, I'd had a conversation with him. Just, I want to get into coaching. He'd had just the illustrious high school coaching career. Can you help me, when this is over, try to find a high school coaching job somewhere and kind of help navigate that. And so when I went down to his room, he said, coach is leaving, and would you have any interest in taking this position? I had not given any thought about coaching in college. So I talked to my dad some about it, and he was like, "It's a great opportunity. Do it for a couple of years, see what you think." And so I was going on recruiting trips before I even graduated from college, and it's a hard business to get into, and being able to get into it that way at a place that I had a lot of familiarity with. There's not that huge transition. Well, there was a huge transition, going from playing with guys to then being their coach, but knew everybody on campus, knew the area, was easy for me to sell what we were doing there. And then he gave me a ton of responsibilities over the years, and I was totally naive.
You became associate head coach at one point too, right?
Yeah, so by the end of it, he turned the offense over to me, pretty much majority of the recruiting. Obviously, he had final say on guys, but it was my job to go out and find them and have a list of guys always to bring to him, kind of the schedule turned over. So, he got to where he had, full confidence and trust in him. It took 4 or 5 years, obviously, to get to that point, and I think that's why I never left. There was other, why go be an assistant somewhere and lose all of this responsibility? Looking back, I think it was probably the best thing for me. And then obviously kind of looking back to maybe diversifying some towards the end may have been a good thing as I became a head coach and really haven't only seen it done one way. And then that's the only way I knew really to do things. And it didn't fit what I had my first year as a head coach. And that's, we can talk some more about that, but to be able to have a mentor like that who's won so many games and done it, never had a losing season like ever in almost 50 years as a coach, which is incredible to think about, and then to have his trust and, he would push me like I was still playing for him to get better as a coach. And so I think that just, it expedited my growth and, gave me a chance to be a head coach at a young age.
What was your experience like the first 2 years at King before Coach Pitts arrived?
So it was So Coach Paulsgrove was a longtime coach there, and very thankful to him too, because he was the one that recruited me and gave me a scholarship to be there, and then he was a head coach at Lees McRae after King, which is another Division II school, and was a great guy, was a really good basketball coach. They had just been to a national tournament when I got there, had some roster changes, and it just we were close a lot, but didn't quite finish the deal. And we had a new AD that came in, and as I've learned too, when there's leadership changes, whether that's the AD level or the president level, change is going to happen, and so that's kind of what happened there. But he was a great man, and a very good basketball coach, very schematically very sound. We learned a lot playing for him as well. And I think Coach Pitts kind of helped us get over that hump and push us in a different kind of way to where, not that losing was acceptable with Coach Paulsgrove by any means, but it was very unacceptable with Coach Pitts, and so we were more fearful of that than anything. And so that kind of got us over the hump.
Yeah, no doubt. You mentioned Lees McRae. It's funny. I went out to App State last year visiting a friend of mine who's a professor out there, and we drove through Banner Elk, and I'm like, that's one of the most beautiful areas of the
Yeah.
country. You talked about maybe just being a high school guy, right? When you're in college, kind of getting to the end of your career, like, hey, if I could be a high school coach, that'd be awesome. Then you get
Yep.
this great experience helping out Coach Pitts at your alma mater, being a D2 guy. As you go along, you become the associate head coach, as you talk about, maybe getting to that thought of like, maybe, hey, do I need some diversification? Was there ever a thought of like, hey, is there an interest of going Division I or getting a head D3 job if I could just get
Yeah.
a head job? Or was it really like, no, you really enjoyed, with what you were as a player and then a coach at the Division II level? Was that kind of just something you felt like you could see yourself sticking there a while?
Yeah, I think I got close to leaving. I think it was I'd finished my master's in the teaching part and the student teaching part, and so was kind of doing both of that while I was working for Coach Pitts, finishing up all of those student teaching requirements and everything else too. So I had a lot going on, and the high school that I had gone to, that job came open, and they called me, and so I went and interviewed for it and thought, okay, this is a no-brainer. I go from working where I played there to I come back home and I work here now, and I'd be happy here for a long time. And so wild story on that. I got to the final two, and an assistant that was on Bruce Pearl's staff that they just got let go at Tennessee. So he was looking for a job, didn't want to leave the Knoxville area, and so he ends up getting it. And so at that point, it was kind of like, okay, well, that was, I gave it a run at the high school thing, and it didn't work out. So I'm going to kind of go all in on this route in college. And at the time, we had just transitioned to Division II. It was coming up like our first full-fledged year in Conference Carolinas, and so I wanted to kind of see what that was all about. And how the Division II landscape worked. I thought that you had a chance to recruit and coach really, really good players without really sacrificing everything as far as time. And at that time, that's, pre-portal and, high school recruiting, and the summer is crazy, and you're trying to be out all July, and you're every Tuesday night and Friday night, you're at a high school game. Not saying that you don't do that now, but it's completely different, the time frame when it comes to the recruiting piece of it. And so, kind of went through that, and liked the balance that I had, the responsibility that I had. There was a couple times that, you would poke around here and there, but nothing honestly ever got serious. And then as I got to become the associate head coach, and you've got all this responsibility at a place that you love, and a guy that you've worked for and built a, almost a second father type relationship with, it became something that was going to have to be a head coaching opportunity really for me to leave there. And crazy, the first head coaching job I ever put my name in the hat for, other than the high school thing at the college level, was at Tusculum, and end up getting it. And it's so, I've had some really, really good breaks go my way as far as the entry into the position, and then being able to get a head coaching job early. And so, but there's been obviously some bumps along that way, just from not knowing what you don't know early on. But the experience I got at King was invaluable.
Yeah, so Tusculum, as you're mentioning, you get that job in 2017, I believe it is. You're the youngest coach in the country at that point. What's it like? I mean, obviously, again, right, everybody says you always think you're more prepared than you actually are when you get the head job. But going into that, what were kind of your feelings? Like you said, you were able to get that job, kind of the first one you applied for.
Yeah, so the whole Tusculum draw to that was it was like it was right in between Bristol where King was and Knoxville where I grew up. And so I was recruited by Tusculum out of high school too. And so I just, it was a place that I had a lot of familiarity with from the time I was in high school and then competing against them when I was at King. We would play them every year. And so it was from
About as
that standpoint.
familiar as you could get, kind of thing.
Yeah, so from that standpoint, it was like I knew where everything pretty much where everything was on campus right away, and commuted from Bristol there for a while, and then was able to move there, and things just felt like they should, like this is where I'm supposed to be. And the AD saw something in me. There was some heavy hitters trying to get in that opportunity. It was in the SAC, the South Atlantic Conference. And at the time, everybody knows who Josh Church is now, but he was a coach at Lincoln Memorial. They were number 1 in the country. And Bart Lundy, who's now the coach at Milwaukee, was a coach at Queens. They were number 2 in the country. And so here I am as a 30-year-old first-time head coach. And again, this is, still all before the portal was even a thing. And they'd had 8 or 9 straight 500 or below seasons, and so there is no real quick fix at that point without the portal. It's a process of high school guys and developing them, and you may get a transfer here and there, but they had to meet certain requirements to even be eligible to play right away. And so the landscape was completely different. But I thought, this is, if I can get involved at this job and have all this familiarity, the high school coaches all through East Tennessee, there is no transition. It's not like I'm moving across the country or 3 states away. And those relationships with the high school coaches at that time was probably even more imperative that you have them because you don't have the portal to fall back on. And so I get there and like I said, I knew one way of doing it, and that was Coach Pitts's way. And if it worked for him, and it worked for me as an assistant and an associate head coach, and why can't it? And honestly, that was part of the reason I was able to get the job is the success and being with him for as long as I was, and the respect his name carried in Tennessee. So I almost felt like if I tried any other way, then I was dishonest in this whole hiring process. And what the system that we had used at King, we recruited to it and implemented it, and it's something that he had done for 30 years, and he knew it in and out. And so obviously I had a really good understanding of it, but our roster didn't fit it, and I was unwilling to adapt and change that first year, reluctant for a variety of reasons, not trusting myself that this is my first year, this is how we'd done it in the past, we'd had success doing it, I'm not going to sway from it. I told these people in the recruiting process, the hiring process of me, like, this is how we're going to play, and now I put a whole different product on the floor. Like, I can't do that. And so I let a lot of these outside voices, noise in my head, just kind of I could see the changes that needed to be made, but I never made them really in fear of trusting what I thought was the right thing to do.
I love what you said right there, because again, this is 87 episodes, and I don't remember at least anybody talking about, again, the hiring process and what you plan to do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And like anything, like, as a leader, obviously you've been a successful head coach. It's right. Like, there's constant change and movement, and you have to be flexible and adaptable, as you're mentioning. But again, you mentioned, hey, I sold myself this way. And if I go and do this, right, like, maybe there's people in the background that are like, well, this guy said he's doing it this, right. Like, there's a mindset where it's like, do I lose trust that way with people who have entrusted me with a program? Right. And so it's interesting because I think that's a real thing that I don't know if enough people talk about. And do you feel like most of that came, like you mentioned, you said you saw some of those things. Do you feel like most of that came after the reflection point, after things kind of ended there?
Mm-hmm.
Or,
yeah, no doubt.
or was it just so much that, I guess really what brought that on? Was it really after the fact that you were just like, hey, I trust it this way because we had a lot of success at Kings. Like, I saw it as a player, saw it as a coach, but I also sold myself to people, and I want to kind of keep like my integrity and trust with them.
Yeah, so I think the first part of it is, I think I wanted my word to be my word, and what I said we were going to do, we were going to do, and I didn't want people to question that. And I think that's being naive on my part too, is that thinking that everybody that interviewed me is going to remember one thing that I said. And that's not true either. And you go, and these D2 searches, like, you interview with everybody on campus. It's not, what you see on TV where the president and the AD fly out to meet you, and it's you meet with 2 people and then a decision is made. Like, that is far from the case at our level. And so you interview with everybody. And
How many different meetings do you typically think you have? 5 or 6, like with different groups of people?
yeah, it'll be from 9 a.m. until 4:30 in the afternoon, and you meet with financial aid, you meet with admissions, you meet with student life, you meet with a group of coaches, you meet with the athletic leadership outside of the AD, then you meet with the AD one-on-one, and, some places have you talk to the players, and so when you're meeting with all these groups, like, you're talking to a lot of people that have zero clue about basketball at all. And so what you tell them, they're reading you more as a person. And so really like the AD, maybe the women's coach, you can if the AD has any type of basketball type of background, you get into some of those things, the more detailed play style and things like that. But so, my thinking is, well, I've told the director of financial aid how we're going to play. I better do it, or she's not gonna, or he's not gonna think what I say we're going to do, which is totally just, me not understanding that at the time.
No, but I think there's a lot of people that still don't understand that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
honestly, I think that, again, because and especially when you're in a season, right? And maybe things aren't going well, and it's a
right.
first time head coach. And if you don't have maybe a few people that you know around you that are like really well and that you can just have those conversations with, I mean, I think it's a real thing, right?
Yeah,
That's just not talked about because you're like, I want to portray myself as who I said I was,
yep,
right? And then again, right? Like it's hindsight's 2020 because all of a sudden, if you get in there, say what you're going to do, you're changing all these things on the fly. People on the outside might be like, well, this guy doesn't even know what he's doing. He's just
right,
going by
right.
flying by night. So I think that's real.
You're 100% right on that, and also Coach Pitts is my, he's my mentor. He's the one that I used to talk all these things through with, and come to find out, our first game, my first ever game as a head coach at Tusculum, we played King.
Get
So
out.
and so it's, that whole preseason, like, so you go from having this relationship to where, we're competing against each other. It's the first game of the season. Like, I can't share anything really with them. Now, after we played, then things were different, but leading up to it, like, you don't have that relationship, and obviously so, because it's the first game of the season. And then my assistant coach was the GA that was there before, who's one of my best friends to this day. But it's his first year being a full time assistant, and so there's a lot of firsts going on, and you don't have that. You asked if all the reflections started after the season, and a majority of it did. But when you're in it, I'm sitting there watching film or practice planning, and well, maybe we should try it this way. This will work. But then you've got this other pool of, like, you've sat in Coach Pitts' office for a decade, and, well, no, I don't think we need to do it that way. And so, but it's because that's how it should have been done at King. It fit a personnel, it fit his style. And I was trying to be a 1,000 win coach in my first year, and that did not go well. And I was replicating a coaching style that was his and was unique to him and worked for him, but it wasn't necessarily my personality, not necessarily how I, as a 30-year-old versus, when he was in his 60s, like, there's a big difference. And when you're a 30-year-old acting like you've done all this other stuff, like, you're not going to gain the respect of the guys right away. And obviously, if the winning doesn't take place right away with it, then a lot of people start looking around like, what, or what's this guy think he's doing? And so, you see all that later on, but when you're in the middle of it, it's just like you would have your set of ideas, and then it was like, well, we didn't do it this way at King, so I better not do it that way. And then it goes back to, well, I told AD we're going to press, we're going to play this way, and why are we not pressing? Why are we not doing this? This is why we hired you. You just led the country in threes at King. Why are we playing a totally different style right now? And, I've learned that those first years, like, I just had a first year here at Coker that was not great, and it was a long year, and I've had other first years. Really, every first year I've had has not been very good at any of these places, and sometimes it takes a season to get your footing right and to get the personnel to fit what you want to do. And so you kind of at the mercy that first year and what you inherit, and then what you're able to bring in late. And so sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, well, you've been able to show, and we're obviously going to touch on Southern Wesleyan and Converse and what you're doing at Coker now. Like, you've been able to show success. So I guess a two-parter would be, what good came out of that and having that happen, even earlier in your career? And two, were there any thoughts of like, maybe this isn't for me? maybe I should go do high school. Maybe I should, was there any type of after that happened? Because again, there's change in administration, which, I feel like is more the case of the guests that have been on the podcast is where, right, there's a change in administration of somebody who hires you, somebody else comes in and wants to do it, their way or wants to hire their own person. Did it kind of change your confidence at all? Like maybe I shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, it rocked my confidence. I had not been a part of a losing season, and I couldn't tell you when. Everybody thinks once they get their shot, well, I'm going to come in, we're going to win 20 games. I'll do this a year or two, and then I'll get my next thing because I know everything, and I'm the youngest coach in the country, and there's a reason they hired me. And so you come in with all this confidence, and you leave, pretty shattered. Questioning a lot, questioning, is this for me? Questioning, we had just had our first child, and
Well, you said you had just moved there too,
I
right?
just
So
moved there. We had bought a house and renovated it and thought, we're going to be here for a long time. We're an hour from family back in Knoxville. This is great. And then it all falls apart. And so, you're fighting all these different things on from a family perspective, what's best, from a basketball career perspective, what is best. I when you get a taste of being a head coach, you don't necessarily want to jump back in and be an assistant again. Part of that is you want to prove yourself that you can do it. And then if you not go back, I don't want to say it like that. If you become an assistant again, will I ever get that chance again? And what
because
do
they
I have
might
to
just look at your record and not know the
Yep.
backstory and be like, well, hey, he didn't get it done. So,
Yep.
right.
Yep. And so is that going to be my one shot? And then I'm going to have to do another decade as an assistant and then I mean, these jobs at our level, at any level are extremely competitive and extremely hard to get. Like I've been in the mix for more that I haven't gotten that I have got. And, that's just how it is. It's such a competitive business, and then if your record shows 6 wins, like your resume is getting thrown in the trash unless you have a connection with an AD or somebody in the administration. It's hard to even get involved. And so I went 2 months with nothing. I talked to a couple of Division Ones about an assistant spot, but I had no D1 experience, and so that's it's great. You can kind of help us as a former head coach, but you don't really understand the Division I landscape. So, those didn't work out. And then the only head coaching opportunity I had was at SWU, was at Southern Wesleyan, and it was the worst Division II record wise in the country. They'd won 11 total games in 5 years combined. They had the lowest scholarship budget of any school in the Southeast region. And so, it's like, is this kind of where I land? They had just won 2 games. They were in Conference Carolinas when I was at King. Like that was we played against them, and it's just like, why, this is not a place I'd really ever see myself being. And then when it's your only opportunity to stay a head coach, you'll
Yeah.
do a lot of different things.
Beggars can't be choosers, right?
Yeah, and so it's either, sit out or go and do this. And so you take a leap of faith, you kind of bet on yourself. And so then my first year at SWU, we win 2 games. Again, this is all still before the portal. And I got the job after graduation. So mid-May, they had promised everybody on the roster they could come back. Nothing would be done to their scholarship. And so I inherited 17 players off of a 2-win team. And so to think that much is going to change the next year, and it didn't. We won 2 games. And so the confidence piece, my first 2 years as a head coach, I've won 8 total games in 2 years. And so you just come off being fired at Tusculum. You're in the midst of just getting kind of your head beat in every night at SWU that first year, and here we go again. I'm going to get fired again, and so you're fighting demons in your mind from every which way. Luckily, I had a great athletic director there who would come by my office like, you don't have to worry about that. Like, we see the progress. We're actually in games. We've got chances to win games. We haven't been here before. We believe in what you're doing, keep doing that. And so having that,
Which is awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so then SWU became the best experience I'd ever had. I had that support. I had that belief. And then fortunate for me, the portal became a thing that spring. We were able to kind of flip the roster, and we went and found guys from winning D2 programs who were looking for a bigger role, but they were used to winning. And so I found the only way you change a program around is you bring winners into it. They may not have had a huge role in the winning, but they're used to it. They've seen it every day, and they're just looking for more of an experience that you could provide for them. And so that was, we were able to get it flipped that spring and summer and change the roster. And dramatically changed the trajectory of that program that spring and summer. But not if I hadn't had the support of that athletic director who every game, hey man, hang in there. We're going to get it going. You're the right guy for the job. We're in games we've never been in before. We're playing harder than we've ever played. Go down the list. He saw something positive in the midst of all the losing, which I'm not the most gracious loser at it. Something I've tried to get better at, but it hits me hard, and having that support from him, if it's anybody else, if it's a different type of leader above me there, I don't know if I'm like, man, is this really for me? I've won 8 games. I thought this was my calling. I thought this is what I was supposed to do, but I suck right now, and we're not winning and all those things, and may have checked out on it, before obviously some success followed after that.
No, I love hearing that because I feel like I don't want to say that's far and few between in today's world, but to have somebody in your corner when things aren't going well, right, and not like, well, what's going on, more like, hey, you're doing fine, just keep at it. I love to hear that. And there's nothing more. I mean, I coached college tennis for 4 years in a sport I knew nothing about. And the first year I took over, we were terrible on the men's and women's side. We won 1 match out of 28 matches. And even though there's literally 15 people that are watching it, when you lead a program and you struggle, there's nothing more humbling, that not that you have to have an ego or anything, but it just literally just puts you in the ground, right? And like how tough that is. And like you said, you come into a program where it's one of the worst D2s in the country. Facilities wise, I think I heard you say that it was kind of a smaller gymnasium as well too. But talk about, also with recruiting there, you had mentioned that in a previous podcast that it was right outside Clemson. So kind of talk about, like, even though maybe internally, right, like maybe we got a smaller gym, maybe we're going to a program that's not as good, like talk about how like outside influences like that, where it's like, well, hey, you can go to a small school here, but you can also get the Clemson experience right down the road.
Yeah, we sold it a lot. It was, there would be times you start talking about Clemson and you kind of have to switch yourself like, well, I don't coach at Clemson. We're the D2 5 minutes down the road. But, if you want to go to a football game, this is when they were at their height, winning national championships, and you want to go tailgate and have that whole experience, like you can go right down the road and do it. And if you want to play basketball, you're going to have that opportunity here. And our facility there is, we had 4 rows of bleachers. And so it resembled closer to an elementary, middle school type facility. But it became we didn't lose at home. Once we got good, we did not lose at home. Like that was a home court advantage for sure. And we didn't lose there. And it, we're very fortunate. I keep going back to it. The portal became a thing then because we have struck out with every high school kid in South Carolina because they would come and see, well, my high school gym is nicer than this. We've got nicer things at my high school. And so we were, and those things are important to a lot of high school kids coming out. And then you get the guys who just want the opportunity and could care less where they play. And those are the guys that we were able to turn the program around with. So, we flipped the whole dynamic, like, this place is a dump, into like, well, nobody wanted to come and play us when we had our better teams. That like it just, you weren't going to beat us there. And so we took something that was a negative and made it into a positive, and so we embraced it. Like I'll never forget that next year, my second year at SWU, we won 20 games.
Which is insane. You go from 2 to 20.
Yeah, we had the largest turnaround in the country, D1 through D3, and we won the conference tournament that year. And we pull up to the conference tournament. The semifinals and the finals were at a neutral site, and the semifinals we have to play King, who won the league. The last player I recruited at King was the National Player of the Year, led the country in scoring, and so he's on the other side, and it's Coach Pitz's last year. And so I'm going against my mentor, and we pull up, and I'll never forget it. There was a banquet the night before, and we traveled in these old church vans, 15-passenger vans, and we pull up, and King's on a charter bus, and the other 2 schools that were in the Final Four were nice charter buses, and we got Southern Wesleyan falling off of the bus, and our guys get out and they kind of look around, and it was just like this kind of chip, this underdog type thing that we carried with us. Like, it doesn't matter if we're on the nice fans or the not nice fans, like we're gonna show up and win this tournament. And sure enough, we played 2 of the best games that I had ever been a part of in the semifinals and finals, and had, able to kind of cap that flip with the tournament championship and make the NCAA tournament, and not able to go and play in the tournament because COVID shut everything down that following week. And but still to finish your season on a win and cut down the nets, like not you don't get to experience that too many times.
Which is like a movie. I mean, again, 2 years ago, you're fired after 1 year and winning 6 games at Tusculum, and then you're going to the NCAA tournament, right? Obviously with COVID and all that stuff, as you mentioned. But Coach of the Year, I mean, just the flip. I mean, how's your emotions at that point, right? Because you talked about like, hey, you're really doing some self-searching, like, is coaching my thing? Am I doing the right way, in terms of playing style and everything else that goes into a program to like, hey, now we've done this. And like you mentioned, right, portal helps it, but still like within that same league you're talking about with King and everything, like it's not like you're playing against,
Yeah.
a small high school league in the middle of nowhere country. I mean, you're playing against some high level dudes. So, I mean, just, talk about that. I mean, I remember, you're talking about the portal and getting players, and you talk about getting winners. And I think you were kind of recruiting like fourth, fifth, sixth best players on winning teams, right? And that guys were looking for a larger role. So, I mean, you couldn't go from one emotion to the other, in a quicker fashion than what you did, taking Southern Wesleyan to winning that conference title.
Yeah, I think you enjoy it. I mean, there's nothing that I think the reward at the end of that, the light at that end of the tunnel was amazing. And like our best player on that team, and for the next couple of years, this was a high school kid that we took that was a winner of all winners, and he was the engine behind it, a little point guard that everybody passed on, and we were really his only option. That's why we got him. And then we took transfers from Lincoln Memorial and from Queens and from Carson Newman and Lander and all the best D2s in our region. The guys just wanted to play more. Obviously, they were good enough to play for us, and they embraced just the opportunity. And so that was a model that we used. But I think it quickly flipped from me from I don't want this to be just viewed as he got lucky, they won a tournament, whatever the case may be. I want to validate this season with another season and another season. And I probably didn't enjoy it. Looking back now, I didn't enjoy it nearly the way I should have, and I think COVID probably, made it all that very, very different in how you processed it and enjoyed it, and there was so much kind of chaos going on around you that you were just that kind of became an afterthought. And then you kind of got, are we going to have a season next season? And then we play a half of a season, but looking back now, 6, 7 years removed from it, it's certainly been the highlight so far of my career. Just that group of guys, how they embraced it, and it wasn't like we got off. We were 6-6 at Christmas break. It's not like we got off to this incredible start, and it was a magical run this whole time. And we got hot at the right time and played some really good I mean, we were up in that semifinal game 55-18 at halftime, and I had no idea what the score was, and I'm in the locker room like, we got to do this better, this better, this better. And my assistant kind of taps me on the shoulder and tells me what the score is, and it's just like you get so locked into every little thing at that time of year, and you kind of lose sight of the big picture and how far we had come. And I think that kind of bled into a little bit of the next year, and I think sometimes then you start to. You hear people talk about the build is a lot easier than sustaining a program, and to some degree that's true. But then once you've built something and you start to have success at a place that's never had this success before, then it becomes you then heap all this other extra pressure onto yourself. Like, well, we got to replicate that the next year, and if we don't, now people are going to be thinking, well, maybe it was just a lucky type run. So you start dealing with a whole nother set of emotions after that.
Yeah, I love your point, about how one of your better players was at a high school and was a little guard. I always feel like, depending on level and league and things like that, I think that's a missed characteristic is right. Cause there's so many teams that are like, well, he's too small height wise, whatever. There's always this, but I feel like there's some of the best players you can get, right? If you can score, you can score. And if you're quick enough and whatever. So I love that point there. So you take Converse, I believe in 2022. And at that time, the school had recently just become co-ed, had been a long time just female institution. So kind of building that really from kind of the ground up, basically. What was your experience in taking Converse?
Yeah, so we got my last year at SWU. We were 19. We finished like 19-9, something like that. We get beat in the semifinals of the tournament by a point against UNC Pembroke, who just come into the league, and they're a national power. They got up to number 5 in the country that year, and they beat us by a point at the buzzer. And so we had all these guys that had been part of that first team that were now leaving. They were seniors and moving on. And, you're kind of, we've averaged 19 and a half wins for the last 3 years. And you're kind of looking for that next challenge. It's kind of like, what's next? And that was kind of the first time I'd been in that position in my career where, there was some interest from some other schools, and you talk to them and kind of feel it out. And, funny enough, the main contact that I had at Converse was the assistant AD from Tusculum. And so, you don't, the importance of not just burning the whole thing down on your way out. I learned that side of it then too. And so, they were in Spartanburg, which was an hour from where I was, but Spartanburg was the fastest growing county in the whole state. And it's, a lot of stuff going on. It was just a much bigger area. It's a unique setup. You're right across the street from Wofford. And so Wofford used to be the men's college and Converse was the women's college. And Converse kept that women's only until COVID. And they'd always been Division II, but only in women's sports. And so they added men's basketball, they added soccer, tennis, and track. And so their first year as a program was my last year at SWU. We were really pretty good that year at SWU, and they were a first year program. I was like, the AD calls me and he says, we'd like to talk to you. Their head coach took a D1 assistant job, and so he's like, we got this opening, are you interested? And I told him on the phone, no, I don't think I am. And, I learned that after that, you don't ever say that to somebody until you go and check it out yourself. And so then they called back again and I said, all right, I'll come up there and talk. But, we were in the same conference and I didn't want it to impact the guys that we had at SWU. And so it was my first time really trying to navigate some of that. But when when you go and play places in your league, you have no idea what their campus is like. You go in the gym, it's another small gym, and it's just like, I feel like I'm just kind of repeating where I just was. And I'm trying to take that next step. But the more I found out about the job, the more I saw the area, the more I saw the campus. So like, oh, this is, kind of maybe this is the next step. And then it checked that box of the next challenge. If I can do it at SWU, and then if I can do it at another startup and we get it going again, maybe that validates some of my coaching ability to myself more than anybody. Maybe if I can do it at another place, then maybe I have kind of started to figure this out a little bit. And so they had won 6 games that first year they had a program. And then we were able to go 15-15 my first year there. And so that was by far the best first year I've ever had. And then that led to the best start I've had was that second year at Converse. We're 10-1. We're top 20 in the country and we're rolling right along. And you start looking into, well, we're ranked number 1 in the region, and that's with LMU and that's with all these other people. And then we had two key guys blow their knee out, and then that changes things in a hurry. And so I dealt with a lot that year. We're 10-1, we're top 20 in the country, we're on our way, it's going to be another NCAA tournament team. And then that happens and we finish winning 18 games. We go 500 the rest of the year. And, I did not handle that very well. Like I thought, well, we're on our way to doing this. And then, some things out of your control changes the whole makeup of your roster. And so I think I learned then too, like the depth of your roster, you're kind of at the mercy of the depth of your roster, the talent of your roster, and the cohesiveness of your roster. And the cohesiveness was great. The depth took a huge hit, and we just weren't able to sustain it, late in the year, playing pretty much 7 players at that time.
No, that's unbelievable, though. I mean, taking that over, like you said, the first year, and you're going from 6 wins to 15 wins. And again, there's got to be something there where, again, just looking back a few short years, like you said, I love that where you're like, thought process. You're thinking, oh, look, if I can do it here at Southern Wesleyan and I can do it here at Converse. What was that like facing Southern Wesleyan when you took the Converse job?
It was not fun. I was very thankful and appreciative of everything that SWU had done for me. I mean, they were the only, without SWU, like I don't know if I'm still in college coaching today. And so I was very appreciative and still had a lot of connections with the people there. It was a weird dynamic. The guy that was my assistant became the head coach. And so I was excited for him to have that opportunity. We had play together in college. And so, it was just very strange. Like, obviously it's not a game you want to lose. You want to win that game, but you also know that without SWU, like, there is no me being at Coker today or at Converse or even still maybe even in the profession, who knows? Like I said, it was the middle of May and that was my only head coaching opportunity. So it was strange. I knew what we were in for going back and playing in kind of the environment that we had helped to create there. And it was tough. We were fortunate enough to win a really close game. And so, as I had gone from King to Tusculum, and we had to play King. And then I'd gone from Tusculum to SWU, and we're back playing King again. And I go from SWU to Converse. We're still playing King. We're still playing SWU. And so, it was I guess I'd gotten a little more used to it, playing a place that you have some connection to, and you kind of start to figure it out. Is you stick to your process and you go through your game plan, and you can't make it bigger than what it is. But those are the games that you don't want to lose, for sure.
What have you learned? And obviously things have changed. You've mentioned it, right? Portal, everything since COVID, I feel like has changed. What have you learned in terms of building programs at different places? Like what's kind of a cornerstone that you've really believed in? Obviously grabbing winners and getting winners is something you've touched on, but is there anything else that you've learned in building some of these programs and, kind of what it takes to at least get some, I wouldn't say instant success, but get some wins where you feel like you're moving in a positive direction?
Yeah, I think patience is huge. I don't have a lot of patience when it comes to the basketball side. I'm a pretty patient person outside of that, but I think that's huge. I think being realistic goes a long way too in your first year. My first year at SWU, we weren't. I mean, it was the greatest thing that because I tried more stuff and I got out of my comfort zone more that year, which has led to some of my better teams. And so without that year of being able to, hey, we don't really have a chance tonight, and I think everybody pretty much knew it. So let's try this and see if this is something going into the future or something that's going to work. So that was an invaluable. Like, you were able to make all those mistakes, try all those things, and nobody thought twice about it. And so being able to adapt, I think, is huge. Not coming in with a preconceived notion. Now, there are obviously some things that are going to be, your culture talk, your non-negotiables, all of those things that you're going to implement. And those are really not your schematic type things, but being able to adapt with your personnel, because your first year is not going to be the desired roster. You haven't been able to recruit fully to a system that you want to implement, and at our level is you're not always able to do it. You may get the best player you can get, and he does not fit at all the system that you want. And so being able to adapt is paramount, and not just be stuck and married to a system, but just being patient with it, being realistic. Like, it's, the timing of when I took the job here at Coker was tough, and how it goes today. Like, a coach leaves, they take the whole roster with them, and that's just how it goes. And my last year at Converse, we had 10 seniors on that team, and so I wasn't bringing anybody here with me that had played for me. And so you walk into a room and you've got, 15 guys that are all brand new, and it's an expedited process. But going into year two, you kind of feel like you kind of see, and our league last year was so good. There were 6 different teams in the top 25 are receiving votes, 6 different ones. And so from top to bottom, the depth of the league was being patient and knowing, like, this spring was our first full class, and, it took me a while to get to that point. And not that you give up by any means on your first year, but, my experience at Tusculum getting fired after 9 months is probably not very realistic. It probably doesn't happen very much. I was part of something that's probably an outlier. And so but I fought all that this past year at Coker, and I think Coker's back. They're in the South Atlantic Conference, the same league Tusculum's in. And so, you want to take this job and you want to show back up. And that was our first league game of the year at Tusculum. And so you go back and, you want to prove, and we lead for 38 minutes and they hit a shot with 1 second to go to beat us. And, and this year mirrored that first year I had at Tusculum in a lot of ways. And fortunate that I've got another, hopefully, year or two here to get it in the right direction and recruit. And I think, your leadership is huge, and our AD here knew that what had happened at Tusculum, and so she was very supportive and understood the dynamics of the whole thing. And so I think that's the longer I've done it, your leadership at the AD position and the president level is paramount. And if you don't have that, it doesn't matter what you've got. If you don't have that support and realistic view of where the program is and belief that you can get them back on the other side of it, it's an uphill battle.
Well, I've no doubt based on what you've explained here so far, that you'll get that turned around in the correct direction. So love your story. I mean, I guess we always finish up with how you get better as a coach, whether that's podcasts, newsletters, you just talking to other coaches, right? Like, just how do you kind of get better, in the off season and things like that?
I think it's probably one of my favorite parts of the year is to self-assess what went well throughout the year. What do we want to do better? Whether that's roster moves, which are, kind of happening at an expedited rate these days. But then I look back at the year we had, and I feel like I had a bad coaching year. Like there's years that you feel like every move you make works, and then there's years that none of the moves you feel like you make work. And so comparing and contrasting, why did it work at this place but not here? Like I listen to a lot of podcasts of a lot of different things, and not just sports, but I think I listened to the Learning Leader podcast yesterday, where they had
Was
a
Ryan Hawk?
Navy. Yeah, they had a
Yeah.
Navy SEAL on it, and he talks about he knew at 11 years old that's what he wanted to do, and I think he can't explain why he wanted to do it, and I think that's kind of I kind of rethink, this is what I want to do, whether we have a good year or a bad year. I feel like this is what I want to do, and so then your commitment gets, kind of your tank gets filled up again, and you're recommitted to all the things that it takes. But I study a lot in the summer. I'll pick 2 or 3 teams and go through and almost watch every game of and try to steal. I'm a really good stealer of things, and, try to implement it and put your own twist onto it. But, I think it's easier today than it's ever been to get better in the summer. The technology piece of it all with Synergy and then all the podcasts and things that are available, and how much information is available for you to go and find. It's at a higher rate than it's ever been, and so just taking full advantage of that, and then just not being afraid to criticize yourself, but not also putting yourself in the grave either. And that's a balance that I've had to really fine tune, because if things start going bad, then it's all my fault, and we're never going to get this right. And finding that balance on, what you self-assess and the responsibility obviously that you take, but then, eh, it's not completely broken, and how can we get this back going in the right direction? And I think that the spring and summertime is huge for coaches to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Nick, I appreciate you again sharing your story. I think it's an awesome turnaround, and again, look forward to seeing you as you turn around Coker as well too here. Well, I appreciate you joining the podcast, man.
Yeah, of course. We'll keep doing what you're doing, giving coaches a voice to share their story. That the unfortunate part of it, but if you're doing it long enough, you're going to get fired at some point. And luckily I got that out of the way early on, so no one had to rebound from it. But hopefully this story will help somebody who may have just gone through something like that and can get to their side of it.